last summer, but I before Israel took out Yahya Sinwar in Gaza and Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon, they also knocked off two. Well, they knocked off. They got a lot of people, to be clear, but among them were two very high-ranking Hezbollah commandos by the name of Fuad Shakor and Ibrahim Akil. Who are these two men? Well, respectively, Fuad Shakur and Ibrahim Akil are the masterminds of the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing that slaughtered 241 U.S. Marines, and the 1983 bombing at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut that same year that killed 60 to 70 people. Those two men had U.S. State Department bounties on their head of $5 and $7 million, respectively, for 40 plus years. Nothing happened until the IDF delivered the goods on a silver platter. Ron, to my knowledge, I'm not sure if the Israelis have asked the State Department for that $12 million in bounty, but that to me is kind of, it really encapsulates, frankly, what America gets out of this relationship.
Hey, Culminators. I am so happy today to have Joshua Hammer join us. It's amazing that I was able to catch him because he is everywhere, fighting every battle, and it's insane. If it weren't for the fact that his content and what he has to, content is really an insult. What he has to say and what he has to share is of such high quality, I would be resentful. But the fact is, it always, always, always pays off. Josh is an author of his most recent book is Israel and Civilization, which we're going to talk about. He has a podcast, of course. He's a syndicated columnist. He is senior editor at large at Newsweek, senior counsel for the Article 3 Project, relatively new father, and all around interesting guy. And Josh, one of the things that I thought was a good reason for us to get together again was you took on the job that nobody else wants to or wanted to, and had that debate with that towering intellect, Dave Smith. Do you regret it? Do you think it worked out well?
Well, Ron, first of all, the only folks who call me Joshua, I have to say, are my soon-to-be 96-year-old grandmother,
Okay.
and my wife when she gets particularly upset with me. So I guess
Fair
I'll have
enough.
to add you to
No.
the list.
Oh, no, no. I don't know what made me do that. No one calls you. It's true. No one calls you
Well, it's
Joshua.
actually kind of funny. So there actually is another public-facing person named Joshua Hammer, and believe it or not, he actually used to work for Newsweek. In fact, I'll give a quick anecdote, and then I'll answer your question about Dave Smith. I was in Dallas, Texas, about 3.5 years ago or so, and I was about to do a Fox Business hit, and the Uber driver was driving me to the studio, and he goes, "Sir, I have to say, I read all about your biography. It sounds horrible when you were kidnapped and brought to Gaza." And I was like, what are you talking about? And it turns out that it was actually this other guy, Joshua Hammer. So the whole thing is actually just very, very, very funny. So
Well,
look,
well, just since we're playing that game, I have recently been involved in a public tiff with Grok, which is utterly unable to draw a portrait of me because it keeps thinking I'm this guy. And it's true, you never see us together at the same place.
oh, that's
Uh,
so
and
good.
and I wish Ronnie Coleman, Big Ron Coleman, the best of health. He has being the biggest Ron Coleman and 10 time or something, Mr. Olympia. Uh, he is legendary, and he's might even be a nicer guy than I am. But back to business. The Dave Smith, it's not as fresh on our minds. So much more ugliness has come into view on the anti-Semitism front,
Yeah.
but and it's a thankless job, really. I think debating someone who is so intellectually dishonest and so many steps below you in terms of preparation. Let's not even talk about intellect. I don't know how smart the guy really is, but do you think it was worth it?
Yeah, look, so this was not my first time debating Smith. I've actually debated him twice now, just in the year 2025. Ron, if I'm not mistaken, you're a Princeton guy, right? That's
Yes.
your okay. So my first time debating Dave Smith was back in February at Princeton, actually. So this was part of a Steamboat Institute. They call it Campus Liberty Tour. They go to campuses and do these debates. So my first time butting heads with Dave Smith was back in February at Princeton, and I took a lot from that debate, and I tried to change my tactics a little bit for the more recent one that we did as part of the Turning Point USA Student Action Summit in Tampa. To be clear, the one in February was fun. This one was definitely, I think, higher profile. Turning Point, massive organization, Charlie Kirk moderating, and so forth. There, do I think it was worthwhile, Ron? I think it was worthwhile for one reason, really, and one reason only, which is that into this debate as my opening statement, and for those who haven't watched it, you can find that on YouTube and so forth. There, I did this one interesting little gimmick. I guess I'll call it a gimmick, where I actually physically, before Shabbat had started, printed out kind of a highlight reel of Dave Smith's most insane tweets. And I literally just took it out of my pocket and started reading some of them during my opening remarks because this is a Turning Point USA debate. I mean, this is like MAGA USA, Charlie. I mean, this is supposed to be, President Trump's grassroots army. And here's Dave Smith calling Donald Trump a war criminal, someone who should spend the rest of his life in prison there, who's essentially accusing him of covering up the world's largest child pedophilia, sex trafficking ring on behalf of Mossad. So I essentially said, who is this guy? And essentially, what is he doing there? And I hit that theme repeatedly throughout the debate when we got to the substance of foreign policy. And I tried to kind of really hammer home this theme, no pun intended, that whatever folks like Dave Smith and Tucker Carlson and those guys say about foreign policy, whether they're coming from a libertarian perspective, isolationist perspective, or some combination thereof, they're entitled to their thoughts there. But the point that I was really trying to drive home to this impressionable young MAGA audience there in the Turning Point USA conference and watching online, Rumble, YouTube, etc., was that whatever they may or may not say, this is not MAGA. This is not America First as President Trump understands it. It's not conservative nationalism as I understand it, as President Trump understands there. And I think that I was successful in driving home that point. So for that reason, perhaps, we can discuss other reasons too, but really for that reason above all, Ron, I think it was ultimately worth it. Yes.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, I mean, not being you and therefore arguably being a click more objective, I like you as much as if you were me, so it's not that much more so. And I really dislike Dave Smith. Not that I've ever met him, but he's seems to have a really ugly personality. But there's a lot of I've been invited to debate lots of people, not Dave Smith in particularly. And sometimes I've been invited by people who had no business inviting me because they didn't speak for the other person. But there's one has a real reluctance to mix it up with people who, as I said, it's not really a discussion. No one's really listening to anyone, and that's in and of itself okay. That we have performances like that are valuable. But and yet one of the things that's really distressing is looking at all the online reaction. It didn't seem as if anyone had been moved, but that's a fallacy. The people who are most vocal, which is what, 10 or 15% of the people who actually get information from Twitter, are continuing to hit the notes that they hit and beat the drums that they beat. Let's not talk about bots. Let's just take that out of the conversation. There are millions of people who really, really welcome. And that's why when people say to another M dash, this is my ADHD brain. When people say to me, Ron, why do you bother arguing with these people online? And I know I'm not going to change their minds. It's a performance I have 260,000
Yeah,
followers.
exactly.
They want to understand. They have no idea of the things that I'm explaining or the reason. And that's what I think you accomplish. And that content is in the bank and it's available and people are gonna continue to draw on it, I think, for years to come.
Yeah, exactly. Look, you're not trying to persuade Dave Smith, obviously. You're trying to persuade, to an extent, the people there in the conference. This is a big conference. I think there were probably 3,500, 4,000 people there in the Tampa Convention Center. So you're definitely trying to persuade this impressionable young. This is after all, this was a student action summit. These are Gen Z, young students. But really, above all, you're playing to the Rumble crowd, the YouTube crowd, And as you said, you're kind of playing to the next 5, 10 years of content for people to kind of come back to. You know what it reminds me of, Ron, from one lawyer to another? It kind of reminds me of the notion of when you write a vociferous dissent in a Supreme Court case. Let's kind of call it a classic Antonin Scalia dissent. I mean, maybe to an extent, you're trying to really kind of tear Ruth Bader Ginsburg a new one, but really what you're actually doing there is you're writing for the law students. You're writing for the folks who are going to read that case in a constitutional law casebook 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now. So yeah, I mean that's kind of what you're doing there. I think that you've intuited that correctly. Look, I will say that I do a bunch of these events, right? But this was definitely a more high profile one. I got more feedback from this event than probably any event that I've ever done. It seems that a lot of people tuned into it, elected officials, commentators. I got a lot of feedback, and it was pretty much all positive. Now, to be clear, there's obviously the trolls online who are tweeting me terrible things. Whatever, that happens. I mean, the amount of times that I've had someone email me or tweet at me, your mother should have, aborted you with a coat hanger, whatever. I mean, I have thick skin. Like this stuff doesn't really phase me, to be honest
Yeah,
with
you know,
you.
it's funny. I have a lot of people, especially non-Jewish friends online, who will DM me. You must get this also. I'm so sorry, Ron. I'm so sorry you have to take this kind of abuse. I appreciate it, but I'm Ron Coleman. This is what I do. I put myself into
Yeah,
this. It does.
exactly.
I don't take it personally. My family was completely eliminated in Europe, except for those of us who are speaking to you right now. This is nothing. This is the fight that we have to do. You make a very important point in passing, which is that this was a student summit. It is the atmosphere on the university campuses. I mean, if these people go back to campus and look, yes, they're the conservatives, but the unrelenting atmosphere of, first of all, sanctioned anti-Semitism and utter misinformation and disinformation about the state of Israel in the academic world is so egregious that anything you can do to get a talking point or two into the head of people or something for them to remember is well worth it. Um, let's talk about your book. Speaking of Israel, this book is so pleasing. You really took the bull by the horns. Israel and Civilization, the fate of the Jewish nation, and destiny of the West. You're really taking as I said, you take the bull by the horns, because there's this very, very strong trope out there that Israel is a huge favor. The support of Israel is a huge favor that the United States does, and it's one that it wouldn't do voluntarily, because it really is of such a net loss for the U.S. But because the Jews control Congress. Well, I mean, there's so many layers to this fallacy, but without even getting into the routine stuff, what you're saying in this book, as I understand it, is you got it. You couldn't be more wrong.
Yeah, so look, that was a long-standing argument. That was the old Patrick Buchanan argument. John Mearsheimer is still making that argument. He's been making it in U Chicago for many years, most recently on Tucker Carlson's podcast. Surprise, surprise. And look, whatever merit that argument may or may not have ever had, that Israel was a dead loss for America, that we did it out of some sort of misguided beneficence, and that it ultimately undermined America's strategic national interest vis-a-vis the Arab countries. To be clear, that argument was always incorrect. But the number one reason, Ron, that we now know that the argument is undoubtedly incorrect is the entire first Trump presidency. The entire first Trump term was a living in real time demonstration of how wrong this mentality actually is. Because how exactly did Donald Trump go ahead and secure the most transformative peace deals between Israel and Arab countries, the Abraham Accords with Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco, Sudan? most transformative peace deals in 25 years. He did it not by appeasing the Palestinian Arabs, not by trying to create a new PLO terror state, a new Iranian satrapy in the middle of the Levant, the middle of the Holy Land. No, he did the exact opposite. He boxed out and sidelined the Palestinian Arab issue and showed that when you go all in for U.S. Israel relations, contra the Buchanans, contra the Mearsheimers, what you actually do is you signify to the other non-Islamist Arab countries that, wow, Israel is really here to stay. America's really committed. And oh, by the way, it probably makes sense to make peace with them because guess who our real threat is in the region? It's not the Jews, it's Iran. So, I mean, the first Trump administration was just an absolute masterclass in diplomacy, in geostrategy, and demonstrating just the lie of all of this. But, the book Israel and Civilization, go ahead, sorry.
You just made a point that you just a light went off on my because
Sure.
living through the first 6 months of the Trump administration, or gosh, it's already August, 8 months of the Trump administration, we look back on the first administration as such a failure to launch. But you're so right about what they did in diplomacy and international affairs, which of course Biden did everything. Biden did everything possible to undo in
Yep.
his 4 years. But that's really a great point. It was the achievements of the first Trump administration are in and of themselves historic on the diplomacy front, especially in the Middle East.
100%. Look, the first Trump administration did a lot, right? To be clear, they definitely were derailed and sidetracked. Not all of it was its own fault. You had the Russiagate, the Mueller probe, the deep state, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
but look, there were other areas that were quite good. I mean, lower court judges. I personally benefited from that. I clerked for a Trump-nominated judge, Judge Ho, on the Fifth Circuit. But I would
We
actually.
love Judge Ho in our house. We have a picture of him next to Moshe and Rabarin. Okay, I'm exaggerating,
I was gonna
exaggerating
say it's a little
a
weird.
little bit, but we spent so in our house because my wife is a legal writer. Uh, we talk about cases over Shabbos. That's what we do, and we just can't get enough of Judge Ho. So no, you really have you really have been privileged. Let's hope we see him on the Supreme Court.
God willing. Ron, I was one of his first four law clerks. We literally launched that chambers in January 2018. I've known Jim now for a long time, and that is my sincere hope is that he's a future Supreme Court justice. But for purposes of present conversation, the only point that I was trying to make was that as great as Trump's judicial picks were in the first term, and they were really oftentimes quite good, especially the lower court judges, it really was his foreign policy above all that to me stood out as his singular greatest thing that he did on the world stage the first time. By the way, not just the Middle East. I mean, trying to reverse, 45 years of Nixon goes to China style diplomacy and tradecraft with China, but all of the above there, and in many
NATO
ways.
reform.
NATO reform, exactly, which has been continued already thus far, right? This recent pledge from von der Leyen over at the EU that more countries are going to start getting up to a potentially as high as 5% of GDP spent on defense. That is a massive, massive win for the Trump administration. But another thing that we discussed at this Dave Smith debate, and to be clear, my book was published prior to the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, but similar themes there. Is he's demonstrated yet again, I think, Donald Trump, what I think is the proper conception from a conservative nationalist perspective as to what an ally actually looks like. There was this funny clip, funny is a charitable word, of Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan. Tucker's like, what is an ally? I don't even know how to define that word. Well, I'll give you a very simple definition of what an ally on the world stage looks like. An ally is a country
I
that you
mean,
could go
keep
ahead,
in
sorry.
mind, anytime Tucker Carlson says he doesn't know something, he's lying to you.
Right. Right.
He's not an unintelligent man. He is and has become an extraordinarily dishonest man.
Yeah, it's genuinely sad. And by the way, like literally like a week or two after he was saying that, he doesn't know how to define what ally meant because he didn't want to credit Israel being an ally. He was referring to Qatar as an amazing ally. So, but I'll give a very easy definition of what an ally is. An ally is a country that you can rely upon that when they act in their own national interest to preserve and protect their own country, there is a simultaneous secondary effect whereby that country is not merely benefiting itself, but their action in defense of their own interests also redounds to America's own national interest. To me, that is really what makes Israel the quintessential ally for the United States, and what demonstrates that the old Mearsheimer Buchanan line was always a lie. Because when Israel acts in its own self-defense, when they are going up against Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Ron, these groups are literally all to a T U.S. designated foreign terrorist organizations. I mean, this is a very simple point, but it is a very, very important point. And I'll give like a very concrete example, one that I actually gave in my first Dave Smith debate back in February at Princeton, which is last summer. But I before Israel took out Yahya Sinwar in Gaza and Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon, they also knocked off two. Well, they got a lot of people, to be clear, but among them were two very high-ranking Hezbollah commandos by the name of Fuad Shakor and Ibrahim Akil. Who are these two men? Well, respectively, Fuad Shakor and Ibrahim Akil are the masterminds of the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing that slaughtered 241 U.S. Marines, and the 1983 bombing at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut that same year that killed 60 to 70 people. Those two men had U.S. State Department bounties on their head of $5 and $7 million, respectively, for 40 plus years. Nothing happened until the IDF delivered the goods on a silver platter. Ron, to my knowledge, I'm not sure if the Israelis have asked the State Department for that $12 million in bounty, but that to me is kind of, it really encapsulates, frankly, what America gets out of this relationship.
It is also there's a profound moral
Yes.
lesson here, and I was recently privileged to have John Spencer on the show,
Mm.
and he emphasizes, as have many of my guests, let's face it, I'm a little bit prejudiced in who I choose to talk to. Israel's fight is the fight of the West. It's the fight of civilization, and let me ask you something. I mean, we talk about Tucker Carlson. Forget about Dave Smith. There's a guy who's just on, from what I can tell, he's on the make. It's an opportunity for him to, but so many people we know have turned so ugly. It has been such a, I mean, when I saw, I mean, at this point, I can, I think the relationship is such that Jack Posobiec, who I really thought was, well, he might very well be a friend, but he's not the person that I thought he was, posting, today is the something anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty. Just context free, just that is the per se dog whistle.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about Jack, but this turn, do you believe what people say that it's all Qatari money? Is it like, what do you think got in the water that so many people that we thought were friends have shown themselves to be so bad?
So I don't remember that exact tweet, but you're totally right that the USS Liberty is here, there, and everywhere one of the most universally recognized dog whistles. There's just no other way to understand that. So that's obviously not good. Look, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, Ron, I went on Matt Gates's One America News show back in March when my book came out. He did a fantastic segment on it. Matt Gaetz literally called my book a battle map, a blueprint to save Western civilization. And, he asked a couple of somewhat challenging questions. It wasn't like a fluff interview, but they were totally fair. And he said that he agreed with all my answers there. And now here we look a couple months later, he's tweeting about Jewish supremacy. I mean, bringing on unhinged anti-Israel gas. I mean, there's too many names to possibly count here. It's happening very, very rapidly. I absolutely do not think that all of it is organic. I don't pretend to know exactly what is going on here. I don't think it's all foreign funding. I think that probably plays some sort of role there. I have long speculated that I think that Tucker Carlson is probably getting some sort of foreign money. I've actually long thought Russia is likeliest. I don't have any receipts or anything like that. It's purely just my speculation there. But I think that there's an additional factor, Ron, which is, you and I both spend a lot of time, for better or for worse, on X, formerly known as Twitter. It's very easy to see these days which posts go viral when it comes to retweets there. The algorithms are simply not free and fair. There's just no way they are. There's just no way. And Linda Yaccarino, the former head of X under Elon Musk, has stepped down. But I would have really liked to see Linda, who I think is a very fair person, really take greater steps to make transparent X's alleged commitment to neutrality when it comes to the algorithms there. Because it seems pretty clear to me these days that if you are chasing that adrenaline rush of getting 3,000 reposts on your post, whatever, you're not going to say something nice about the Jews and nice about Israel. You're going to tweet Jewish supremacy, as Matt Gaetz did a few weeks ago, things like that there. It seems to me like that is a large part of what's going on here.
So, what do you suppose makes them viral? Are there really, I mean, even if everyone in Ireland and everyone in Gaza re retweets it, I don't think that's I do think there is a bot army
Yeah.
that is funded by Qatari money. I mean, I think that's really been fairly well established, and I'm sure that they're paying other people elsewhere to do that as well. And the Jews will always be outnumbered. What is always fascinating, in fact, to me, is to find in these gross anti-Semitic threads how many non-Jews are horrified and nauseated. Regular American and even Englishmen, which Britain has really turned a very unfortunate corner as well.
Yes.
But people, that we can identify with as sharing our cultural values. Twitter isn't real life in so many ways, and this is one of them.
Yeah. So look, I think that part of it is definitely bots. Again, I would love to have more transparency under the hood on this stuff
Yeah,
there.
well, unfortunately, Elon seems to have found another shiny object.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when Elon first took over Twitter, this was kind of part of the big push, right? I mean, the Twitter files were not that long ago, actually. That was less than 3 years ago. So, his whole commitment to full transparency there seems to have really dwindled. I would love to see a lot more of that, but yes, I strongly suspect that there are a lot of bots. I do suspect that X has become also that there is a much disproportionately higher share of quote unquote far right people. I mean, outright fascists, neo Nazis, whatever you want to call them. There, it's not anywhere close to a majority, obviously, but for various reasons, they have now, I think, seen that they can get away with this on X. That there's not going to be any kind of moderation there,
But not only get away with it, they can magnify their
right,
impact. One of these guys, with his stupid ass, Teutonic Knight, uh, uh, you know, um, profile pic, he can open 6 accounts, and that's his hobby.
right.
And because when my wife was with the ADL in the 80s, they used to say, we're running out of anti-Semitism. Now, I don't think they would say that now.
Right.
But then again, we're looking at a different population because we've imported a great deal of anti-Semitism.
Right. So it really is all of the above thing. We have definitely imported a lot of anti-Semitism, noted about that. I have very strong thoughts on Muslim immigration to the U.S. I basically don't believe in. I think it should fully stop, period, full stop, end of story. I take a pretty strident position on this one, actually. And, there's also, to me, the single most troubling thing that I can identify, and this is still a fairly fringe phenomenon, but we've mentioned Tucker numerous times. I mean, he, as often, is kind of the tip of the spear in trying to resuscitate this. There are certain Christians who are trying to bring back types of Christian theology that are at their core really anti-Jewish and have been completely anathema to the entire history of the United States. So like the notion of, full-fledged replacement theology, there's nothing particularly special whatsoever about the children of Israel, about the Hebrew Bible. We can basically discard it there. I mean, Tucker in a recent episode was essentially trying to argue that the New Testament for Christians and the Hebrew Bible, what they call the Old Testament, that these are incompatible texts, really, and we should just ditch the Old Testament and focus on the New. I mean, I'm sorry, hello, have you read anything from the American founding? Like literally anything? Have you been to Philadelphia and looked at the Liberty Bell, which is inscribed with Leviticus? I mean, did you know that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson literally wanted the national seal of the United States to be Moses leading the Israelites across the Red Sea? Did you know that Abraham Lincoln famously referred to Americans as a, quote, almost chosen people in a speech right near you in Trenton, New Jersey in February 1861? And on and on and on we go. I mean, John Adams refers to the Jewish people as the great civilizing force in the history of mankind. Alexander Hamilton says that the reason that he knows God exists is because the Jewish people are still alive today. I mean, none of this has any basis whatsoever in the religious or theological sectarian history of the United States. So that actually really terrifies me. That there are some provocateurs who seem to relish in trying to stir the seeds of discord between Christians and Jews and trying to resuscitate fringe theologians and types of theology. That to me is extremely, extremely pernicious. Obviously, the mass import of Islam has been horrific, and I worry deeply about that particular issue there. But America is still a Christian majority country, and what really, really, really worries me is if some of these fringe theologians and types of theology really start to pick up a little bit.
So now let me switch gears a little bit and talk about a different kind of religious worry, which is the Jews. You and I both became more Jewishly observant and more Jewishly conscious. Imagine, as brilliant as I am, I still make that mistake. Conscience, conscious.
It's a tough one.
It, just yesterday, I saw a tweet to the effect that the Federation, New York Federation, gave $800,000 to Gaza. To Gaza. I think you would agree, when you that we're reaching a tipping point in the Jewish world between the Mamdani success in the Democratic Party and the disgusting statements by the likes of Schumer and Nadler, so-called Jewish Democrats regarding Israel and Gaza. I think it's fair to say that the concept of a Jewish vote is either extinct or people have to understand it in a completely new way.
So look, this is Ron. This has been one of my biggest pet peeves since well before I turned towards a more religious direction. I mean, literally back when I was in 11th, 12th grade. I mean, Ron, I was the typical kid in AP government class in high school. So I graduated high school in '07. So my senior year AP government class would have been '06, '07. It was kind of like peak Bush era Guantanamo Bay. I mean, I was literally the guy arguing against 25 liberal classmates trying to defend Bush era detainment policies at Guantanamo Bay, forced interrogation, waterboarding, all that. So, I've been sparring against liberals and Jewish liberals since my formative years in forming political opinions, right? And this has been a massive, massive source of irritation for me for decades now. Is how politically left Jews are. There's really no demographic in America that votes more against their own self-interest than American Jews as a whole. The point that I try to emphasize when I go on shows like the Charlie Kirk show, friendly kind of pro MAGA voices, the point that I try to emphasize over and over again is you have to understand that there is a gargantuan difference in Jewish voting patterns between Orthodox traditional Jews, someone who has some sort of commitments to the religion, versus Reform Jews. And I don't mind just calling it Reform. I actually really excoriate Reform Judaism pretty brutally in my book, partially because it's personal to me. I grew up, not in that tradition because tradition is kind of oxymoronic, but I grew up in that milieu, in that particular setting there. And I really think that the fact that the United States is the only country, literally the only one, where Reform Judaism has really proliferated, not in Canada, not the UK, Australia, not in any other Anglophone country, I really do say that is kind of the number one reason why American Jews do vote left. But the demographics, Ron, even from a Jewish perspective, really are on our side because it is the traditional Jews, the Orthodox Jews, that are marrying fellow Jews and are having lots of Jewish children. On the other hand, the secular Jews are assimilating, they're intermarrying, they're not having Jewish children there. So if you solely look at the aggregate Jewish voting data for exit polls, it is slowly going in a more Republican direction from 30% to 35%. And I actually kind of think that 35% number from this past November is probably still actually a little undercounted for various reasons. I think it's a little higher there. But it's trending in the right direction. By the way, Ron, there's also a funny thing here. So you've met my wife at least once or twice. So she's Sephardic. So she was born in Israel too. She grew up here in South Florida where we live now, in a very kind of Sephardic Israeli kind of bubble. And when I go over there, we do a lot of Shabbats and Yom Tov Jewish holidays, and my in-laws, they live pretty close to us. When we go to the big Sephardic synagogue there, if there's a single person who voted for Kamala Harris, it's literally maybe like one. I mean, my wife
Oh,
literally
this is an Ashkenazi disease. This is not.
yeah.
This is something that is not. This is something that we got from the Khazars, our ancestors.
I can't, I mean, Candace Owens will appreciate that reference, right? Um, but look, again, the demographics are are very much on our side here. I mean, even when I daven at Chabad, I mean, yeah, any kind of Hasidic or Haredi circles, I mean, it's a non-existent phenomenon there. So the demographics are on our side there, and that ultimately is what I take a lot of solace in.
And part of the reason I bring this up with you is I had a discussion with Rabbi Zupnik, who you know,
Yeah.
who's going to be as usual at NatCon next month, and I think you're going to be there too.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a little bit funny because the NatCon movement, the father of the NatCon movement, is Yoram Hazony, who was at Princeton with me, and also became more Jewishly observant as he grew into adulthood. And there is this question of what do we do to get across to conservatives, and this is part of what I consider to be my mission online. That I'm going to say it because no one who really disagrees with me is likely to be listening to this at this point anyway. The real Jews, the people who for whom Jewishness is really a central component of their lives, are conservatives. They're not the liberals. And not only that, we can acknowledge the problems that Jewish liberals have inflicted on this country. And if you want to generalize about Jewish liberals, we'll join in with you. The damage that Hollywood has done, Hollywood, which has such a large Jewish, not Jewish, but Jews influence.
Right.
Uh, and at the same time, also, there's a real lack of understanding about coming back to your book to finish off our discussion. The dumbest thing I see people writing in there when trying to add their 2 cents about the Middle East is it's a religious war. It's greater Israel. The Israelis, Israel is not a state that's motivated by a religious mission. There is a traditional religious component at the heart of the concept of the state of Israel, a Jewish homeland, but it wasn't founded by religious people. It's not run in any meaningful way by religious people. The demographic issues and the issues of the draft for yeshiva boys far beyond our either our time or our scope today. But we people need to understand that and to hear from people like you.
So look, I will say you're totally right. Obviously, that Israel was founded by broadly secular people. Ben Gurion. By the way, the whole reason that they agreed to have this dispensation for the draft for the yeshiva boys was that they were convinced that this would be a tiny minority and that secular Jews
That's
would
right.
run it would run Israel for time immemorial. They didn't really think that one particularly well through. But despite all that. I do think that the country is trending in a much more religious, traditional direction. And to this day, they do teach Bible, Torah to an extent in quote unquote public schools in Israel. Public services, buses are severely diminished on the Sabbath, things like that. So there are some elements. I will say, Ron, to be honest with you, I'm not an Israeli citizen. I don't live there. I live in America. But if I were to, if I hypothetically were an Israeli citizen, I would be a staunch advocate actually for incorporating more halakha Jewish law into the Jewish state. This is actually a long-standing pet peeve of mine. I think it's actually abhorrent that they market kind of the rainbow flag stuff in Tel Aviv there. And I hear this from a lot of our Christian friends, by the way. A lot of our Christian friends who are positively inclined toward Israel. They think of the holy people living in their homeland there. They don't want anything to do with this rainbow agenda. And I've communicated that, by the way, to a lot of Israeli friends. It typically falls on deaf ears. Perhaps a conversation for another day. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean it's a great point. There's a Kulturkampf in Israel. It's different from the Kulturkampf in America for lots of reasons, but there are analogies, and to some extent the Israeli Kulturkampf between the growing religious component of Israeli society and American, well, no, the cultural and the founders of the state and the people who control the institutions of the state. I mean, talk about judicial activism. I mean,
Oh,
there's a conversation we could have for
oof.
an hour. I mean, the Israeli courts, the Israeli Supreme Court makes the American judiciary look like, shrinking violets.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nauseating. But you and I think we could go on for hours, and that's almost what we've done today. Josh, great, best of luck with the book. I'm so happy to see you succeeding everywhere and popping up everywhere, and always having something thoughtful and well reasoned to say. It's great talking to you again.
Ron, you're a gentleman and a scholar. It's really wonderful to see you. Thank you.
See ya.